Everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started with this session. Thank you all for coming to Outline to Outcome, where we're going to be talking through some practical frameworks for emerging leaders. Before we get started, I'm going to say I've got a lot of frameworks and things to go through, so I'm going to try and jam through those as fast as I can, and then if there's a question at the end or we want to go back and look at some, we definitely can. But that's the way we're going to run through this. And we'll also start this off by caveating that a lot of these things you probably already are doing implicitly. These are going to be ways to formalize that process, and this entire thing's designed for you to be able to grab a slide or two out and share with your student leadership to help them through processes that they not be familiar with. So without further ado, my name is Bryce Hanson. I've been involved in FIRST since 2018, started in California, was the head mentor of a team in Nashville. Now I'm with 125 here in Boston. I am a strategy consultant, so if you're like, frameworks, PowerPoint, this is feeling familiar, that's what I do for a living. And I am a huge fan of frameworks, templates, resources, things like that, ways that you can leverage existing material to help your training and learning and growing go faster. You may know me from all of the ones I've already put on Chief Delphi. I've got a website going of just a compendium of all of my various resources. So feel free to take notes during this, but I will also be publishing all these slides, all my notes for these slides. This session is recorded. There's going to be a syllabus that goes along with this if you want to give this presentation to your students. So that's all covered already. So going into what we're going to have here today, we're going to look at 4 different core areas here. And in each of these, I've got 2 different sorts of frameworks that are going to help you teach your students or help your students teach each other. We're going to go through teaching, then we're going to go to prioritizing, delegating, and assessing. So let's start off with teaching. All right, let's start with our overview first, which is what are we doing with frameworks? Frameworks are here to help us codify experience, gain efficiency, and reduce imposter syndrome. So the biggest thing about our frameworks are to be as repeatable as possible. We want to make sure that with these processes that we go through every single year, we've heard about this in other presentations so far, these are processes that we may be very familiar with. Our students may be doing this for the first time. Things that may feel natural to us are brand new to a 13-year-old who's just starting out on the team. So trying to make sure that the core things that we're going through feel sort of set up properly, feel dependable, and then also us making them faster. Having these frameworks help sort of cut right to the chase of what are we doing, how are we organizing our thoughts, and then let you wrestle with the actual important things instead of just trying to structure everything out. And finally, I think that frameworks really help with students who don't know where exactly to apply themselves. We've heard from Juju earlier on, students who sort of get lost in the eddies off to the side, who don't know where to start. I think frameworks for both new students and for new leaders really help them contextualize, okay, how do I actually start through this process? And then once they get going, they have that momentum to carry them through. So, moving into teaching. Our frameworks are going to get a little bit more complex, a little bit more heavy-handed as we go. Again, I'm sure you have seen at least one of these at some point before. And the goal here is that for the ones you haven't seen before, you get to learn something new. For the ones you have seen before, grab that slide, throw it at your student leadership, say, learn from this, please. First, we're going to start with our EDGE method. Our EDGE method, if you've ever been a Boy Scout, you've definitely seen this one before. But this is really good for one-on-one training. This is how do you get one student or 2 students to pick up a new skill. These skills are going to be usually tactile things. This is going to be harder to teach some concept or idea to, but if I want to teach a student how to rivet 2 pieces of metal together, this is exactly how I'm doing it. I'm walking through these 4 phases. 1, educate, 2, demonstrate, and then guide and enable. Having that structured 4-phase process really helps the student realize, okay, what am I doing? And then move into, I can see it happening, I can try it out myself in a way that I still have a big safety net, and then I am ready to go to do this without a mentor standing over my shoulder. This works really well with one student, maybe two students, and as the group grows, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming for the teacher to be able to make sure they can bounce through the demonstrate and the guide step effectively as we go through. So this is really good for that one-on-one or one-on-two sort of situation. Where we go from there, though, is into this. This is the release of responsibility method. And what this is a structure where you can take a one-on-several approach to training your students. You start out at the highest level, this focused instruction where the teacher is the model for what you're walking through. The teacher is doing the demonstrations, is intellectually talking through the program, and then as you go through these layers, you transition the responsibility of doing the task or demonstrating the new skill from the teacher doing it down to the student doing it. And you have a few intermediary steps where you can transition that responsibility of doing the thing into opportunities for the students to teach each other and learn from each other as well. So going from focused instruction where the teacher is the model, the I'm gonna do it phase that I'm sure we're all familiar with, into a guided instruction where the teacher is walking through it. This goes back to our demonstrate phase of the EDGE method, same sort of idea. The teacher is guiding through as the students are following along, but it's still very much a front of the classroom style pedagogy. Then we sort of shift to the other side on our student pyramid side where we are collaborative. This is where the teacher shifts away from I'm doing it or we're doing it to I'm gonna sort of float around, but you're gonna be the ones who are doing it together. This really helps students learn from each other. I know that as a mentor, sometimes students aren't as receptive to learning from me, but they'll learn better if they're learning from a peer or a student who maybe has done this before. And you get that sort of reinforcement, you get the students to talk to each other and to figure out, okay, are we doing this right? I think that person over there is doing this right. I can learn from what they're doing. And then finally, as we get down to the bottom level of this pyramid is independent. This is where the teacher is ready to sort of let the students go and ready to be there as an aid if necessary, but really just as that last level of check of this looks like it's going well, the students are ready to do this on their own. If the student needs to float back up a level and ask for help from a peer, that's totally fine, that's great, but we have fully transitioned from the teacher is doing it and everybody's watching down through these levels to the student is on their own and feels ready. Now, this is not necessarily gonna be a like, yep, 10 minutes, we're gonna go from the top to the bottom of this pyramid. It may happen over time. That's totally fine. The EDGE method is ideally set up to be a like one sit down, we're gonna do it together, end to end. This pyramid may be a little bit different. So just something to keep in mind. It's okay if you are spending a day as a teacher and then it takes you 2 or 3 weeks or longer, depending on what you're teaching, to get all the way down to independent. I know having the lesson of like how do we rivet things together can go pretty quickly. How do we CAD an entire robot is not gonna happen in an afternoon. Now we're gonna move on to prioritizing. Again, I'm sure these are things that you are already doing on some level, and this framework just helps you sort of formalize that process, think through it, and really helps tie everything together. So first, we're gonna look at short-term planning with an Eisenhower matrix. This helps you sort of lay everything out on 2 axes. One, urgency, how fast do I need to get this done? Is this gonna train wreck my season if we don't do it right now? Is this gonna blow up our off season if we don't get this done yesterday? And 2 is importance. How critical is this to the success of what we're doing? When you lay out your tasks on here, what I like to do is draw this up on a big whiteboard, or there's some digital tools. Sometimes you just open up like a PowerPoint slide and let everyone have edit access to it. And you put out these 4 big boxes, and then you just sort of think through each of the tasks you have to get done over the course of the next day, week, something like that, and just toss them on there. Figure out, okay, this is something that is probably low urgency, but high importance. It's something that it doesn't actually need to happen right now, but it's something that we really need to make sure we get done. That goes in that top left box, where you have the time to think through it and to sort of spend more time figuring out exactly how we're going to do it. Something that is, on the other hand, low importance, high urgency is something that you find your reasonably qualified student leader and say, all right, we know this needs to get done right now. Go start it. And those last two boxes, the obvious ones, the low importance, low urgency, probably not where we're going to start. Probably the tasks that, if they happen, great. If we run out of other things to do, great. But ones that we do not need to focus on. And then high importance and high urgency, those are the tasks that you're going to take the majority of the student resources to get done immediately. If I'm doing kickoff planning, something that is high urgency, high importance is reading the rule manual. It's not going to be a super time-consuming thing. It needs to happen right now, and everybody needs to do it. Building the field elements, high importance, low urgency, can happen sort of over the next several weeks. So you can start to see how different parts of your season on a shorter time frame can fit into this. Now, if we want to look at a much longer time frame, we'd use something like this, which is an action priority matrix. And this helps use similar levers of effort and impact to figure out how are we outlining all of these tasks. This isn't going to end up with a delete bucket, and it uses one of my least favorite consulting terms ever, quick wins. But this is really a structure to look at our tasks on a longer timeline. This would eventually lead into a Gantt chart. I'll take this as an opportunity to say, whatever tools you're using, stick with the ones that work best for your team. I'm sure some of you have ended up in the same boat as I have, where you are really gung-ho about a Gantt chart in the first week, and then by week 4, the Gantt chart hasn't been updated in like 27 days, and everything's falling apart. Don't try and force your frameworks to fit your team. Pick the ones that are going to work for you, and those might change over time. Maybe you start with like, we got 4 boxes, we're gonna put everything in 4 boxes, and 3 seasons later, it makes more sense to shift to something that is even more minute and structured, but work with the ones that make sense for who your team is and what you are ready for. So walking through this step by step, quick wins, these are things that are great for newer students. These are great for students who are really driven and need that like extra boost of encouragement of I'm doing something well and I can see the results of it. Those are things that are not going to take too much time to do, but are going to have a really big impact on the team. Filling out grants can end up as quick wins where like I put in an hour or 2 of work, it got my team thousands of dollars. The big projects are those sort of season-long things. Maybe you are running an off-season event for the first time, or you're trying to spin up FLL programs. These are things that are going to be a lot of effort, but are going to have really big payoffs. On that lower impact side of things, these are both things that you need to get done, and you can sort of balance out who these are being assigned to based on how much effort you think can be put into those and how accountable and responsible your students are. Which takes me to my next section, which was the whole impetus of why I actually put together this presentation. I've shown this to some of you for sure. This is walking through delegating. I think delegating and sort of the buy-in that is tied to that is such a critical part of FRC and something that we don't, or at least I've seen on my own teams I've been part of, we don't teach formally enough. Usually you have a student leader who ends up in that sort of delegating role. I'm sure us as mentors, we've been in that delegating role as well. Being your job or your lead student's job to figure out, okay, I have way too many tasks for just one person. How do I assign these out to people? And it's sort of a vibes-based experience of making sure that I'm giving a task to a person who can get it done. So here are some more frameworks to think through. how am I matching these tasks, and then we'll get into, once I've delegated them, what does that level of responsibility look like? So, walking through delegation matching. We've got 4 categories here: identification, at a terrible angle to read this, effort, skills, and matching. So identification, we want to make sure we have an idea of what our student population is. As mentors, I'm sure you are very familiar with most of your students. If you're joining a new team, maybe you don't know the students as well. I know when I joined 125, I really worked with 5 students. I had a very small population of my students. And then task identification, this is once you've put everything on your matrix from previous slides, you have a better idea of what are the different tasks you have and sort of what levels of responsibility and effort are they going to require. Skills, similar sort of idea. What are the skill sets in the population of your team? What are your students good at? What are your students needing more mentor support on? Which students are good at what? And competence, which isn't necessarily the same thing. You can have a student who is very skilled in something, but who may need more oversight to be able to get something done. So you might put some students together to sort of reinforce that competence. Effort, sort of related to that as well. This is both a time commitment thing, so your high urgency and high effort things. Are you picking students that are matched to those tasks to delegate, who are going to be able to actually put in the hours needed to get the project done? And then buy-in and follow through is, once you set that student off on that course, are they going to be able to see it through to the very end? Are they going to be able to stick it out even when it's not going well and make sure that this project doesn't sort of die on the vine halfway through? I've certainly been a part of organizations where it starts off high momentum, everyone's excited, you check back in a month, and that momentum really tailed off after day 3. So making sure you're finding those students who are going to be able to carry that all the way to the end is a really important part of that process, and what the entire next slide is about. And then finally, matching everything up, and I think the biggest takeaway here is not to delegate junk. And what that means is just, there are plenty of tasks where they really don't need to be delegated. Things that fall into that delete bucket from a previous slide, where it doesn't make a lot of sense to go through all this work of figuring out who is going to be the most suited to a specific task, and then say, and freshmen, sweep the floors. It doesn't make a lot of sense as a thing to delegate. It's a thing that needs to get done. I wouldn't put it into this matrix. So just make sure that as you're assigning things out and you're delegating these tasks, and you're not just delegating for the sake of delegating. Once we have selected what tasks go to what students, we look at something like this. This is delegation tiers, and this is in an order of increasing responsibility. Do as I say, look into this for me, give me your advice and I'll decide. Explore, decide, and then check back with me and let me know what you think. Explore, decide, and make a decision within these limits, and then take care of this for me. I think this is a really critical piece of delegation that we don't think through enough when we're matching up students with tasks. We say, hey, you should get this done, and then we just set them free. And there's a lot of range in the delegation process where that's not a good enough solution, where you say, hey, random sophomore, raise us money. I'm delegating raising money to you. That's too big, too broad of a thing to hand to one student, and especially a newer student who doesn't have the sort of ideas or experience to make that happen. So I think it's great to just pull up this slide and have a conversation with your student, or have your student leader have a conversation with people on their sub-team and say, hey, where do you feel confident with? Some tasks are just very leader to teammate handed down as hey, you're gonna do exactly this. That's great. But having that conversation to figure out if you fall somewhere in the middle, what does that middle look like? And some students, as they get more passionate about the program and they feel more confident in their skills, they may be ready to take on a new step that you weren't actually aware that they were ready for. If you think a student's somewhere around a 3, where you say, hey, do some research, let me know what you think, and then I'll make the decision after that. And the student thinks, hey, I think at a 4, then you can have a conversation there and open up even more opportunities for your students to get involved in that process and feel more bought in overall. So we're then going to move on to our last section. I'm realizing I'm moving through this a lot faster than I expected, so I'll have lots of time at the end to go through questions and flip back through these and talk through this some more. So finally, looking at assessing. Assessing is something that I think as well, teams have started to do more, and I've talked to some teams who are adding mid-season assessments. What Juju said, the "Are you having fun?" question. That's such a huge part of this program, and getting that live feedback, anonymized feedback is great. Feedback that you can connect back to specific students, also great if that's something they're comfortable with. But assessing really comes in 2 different parts. The first part of assessing is self-assessment, and then the second part of assessing is group assessment. So, self-assessing. Self-assessments are something that I was using when I was a drive coach in high school. This is something that I gave to kids who were wanting to apply for the drive team, and I had them fill out this sort of matrix as a way to get a better understanding of how the student thought that they were doing. And this is a great tool that I've used as a mentor as well to get sort of a peek under the hood of what the student feels they are ready for. And then you can mentally go through and be like, okay, I fully agree. I think this student is crushing it in communication. They're a great leader. I'm ready to give them tasks. It's also, and I would say even more important, when those things aren't matched up. If you have a student and they fill out this form and they go, I'm the best communicator there's ever been, I listen all the time, and you're looking at it and you go, that hasn't been my experience with this student, that's really a chance to open up the conversation with them, and you might flip back to that sort of delegation tiers and figure out, okay, they think they're around a 5, I'd probably assign them at like a 2, and have that conversation as you go through. I also want to say, this is non-exhaustive. You could have way more categories on this than I have up here. This is a snippet of what I put together 8 years ago or something like that. I'd probably build it a little bit differently. I will also highlight, I'm a big fan of the like 4-tier rating scale, 4-point rating. And the reason for that is if you ever ask someone like, hey, put them on a scale of 1 to 10 for me, you have a giant spike at people say, it's about a 7. And using a 4-point scale like this really makes a student commit, all right, I'm either below the median or I'm above the median. And it really helps you get a clearer picture of where students think that they are. I guarantee you if you put this on a 5-point scale, you'd have way more 3s and you'd be back to where you thought, like, okay, all these students think they're fine. They don't want to say they're too good. They don't want to say they're too bad. So you end up with a lot of 3s. So in general, I like having even numbers of scales. I've used 6-point scales before. I've even told students, use a 10-point scale, but you cannot say a 7. You can pick a 6 or an 8, but you can't pick a 7. And just giving them the tools to define themselves and assess where they are at, but have a little bit more skin in the game and a little bit more of an understanding of where am I on one side or the other in these categories. I think also having a little bit of text on here to define what does a 1 look like, what does a 4 look like. You can be as descriptive or not as you want in each one of these sections, but having a little bit of wording around it instead of just like not good to great to help students better self-assess where they are at right now. And the last one we're moving to is group assessment and retrospectives. This is a screenshot from a retrospective that we did last year. And we do these after every single competition, and then we do this at the end of the season, and then the end of the off season. And this, like it says at the bottom, this helps inform that entire next loop of this entire process. So we try to keep our retros super lightweight on the framework side of things, because if you say, hey, just start adding things to 37 different categories, students sort of get lost in the weeds. We try to make it as easy as possible. What went well? What didn't go well? What are we improving on? And we use this tool called Easy Retro. It's free. The limitation on it is that you can't have more than 3 retros going at a time. You got to delete them as they come out, so you got to like screenshot, download, whatever. But what we do is we get all the students in a room. If it's a competition that we sort of see where it's headed after the first day, we'll do it at the competition. We'll do it the first meeting back. We also like to take that Monday off. But we'll do the first meeting back after that. In particularly tight timelines, we have done this in the car where we just have whatever mentor is in the vehicle, let's start this process now. But generally we like to do it all together. And the reason that I have all the students sit down together to start this is because if you say, hey, whenever you're free, flip back a slide. Whenever you're free, please make sure to fill in some cards. No one's gonna do it. So, all of these are anonymous. When we start the retro process, you just fill in as many cards as you want in each of these categories. They get randomized within each category, and then we open up voting, and you get 5 votes. You put up 5 votes per category, and you say, these are the ones I agree with the most, and then you get a nice list of where student priorities are falling. And you can get a sort of sentiment capture of generally, what did students think went well, what didn't go well, and where do we need to put our effort going forward. So this really helps capture that entire picture of an event, of a season, and then you can take that third category and you can feed that back into your Eisenhower matrix, feed that back into a Gantt chart, something like that, and then you have a results-based approach of what did we end with, how does that inform the next loop of this process. So we're gonna move into sort of the last thing I have here before we open up for discussion or before we wanna flip back to other content, and that is this big flywheel, which I will let you sit with for a second, but this is just a much larger approach pedagogically of the learning process for students, how this feeds into a lot of things I've already been talking about. It's all interconnected, and thinking through where does my relationship with a student fall on here? Where does my relationship with a sub-team fall? Where does the relationship with a sub-team and sub-team lead fall? And figuring out, like, okay, I think the mechanical sub-team is like between like focus and independent, whatever. And having a better picture of like where they are sort of on these overlapping circles can help give you a better understanding of the team itself and where the team should be headed next. So that's what I've got in terms of content. And I'm happy to flip back. I'm happy to answer questions, and we'll go from there.
How do you, when delegating tasks, how do you then prevent those tasks from being delegated? Or I guess, like, if you have a student go do something, and then is it okay if that student then delegates on their own? Or I guess like it could just be a whole chain of kind of handing off tasks, what you want to avoid, but at the same time you want to obviously empower students to try to find ways to lead themselves. So
yeah, absolutely. So that definitely does happen sometimes, and I think that really comes back to like a mismatch of task. So the places that I find a task gets passed off is when one of two things happen. One, the student feels that they are too skilled and too high level to be handed that task, or two, they are not skilled enough and don't feel equipped to handle that task. And both lead to, hey, this isn't for me, this should be for someone else. So driving back to this, trying to really work through each of these different categories and figure out how is this task appropriately matched. The other half of that is making sure that when you match up those tasks and that delegation to somebody, that there is some amount of accountability structure that goes on top of that. Ideally, all the students are going to be accountable and they're going to be responsible and they're going to go do it. We all know as mentors, does not always happen that way. So putting in some sort of check-in process. This could be a check-in from mentor to student leads to hear how things are going. This could be you as a mentor telling your student lead to check in with everybody, having sort of a regular cadence of that process and making sure that that check-in is happening every few days, every week, whatever is needed to make sure that student is still on track. And that's also where we're going to start to hear, hey, I wasn't really feeling this one, but I think that this other person is going to be great for this, and I've had them start doing it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, obviously, we're trying to use this to try and match it correctly the first time, but you can start to learn from your students. Hey, I've given this student 3 similar tasks. They have started passing that buck to somebody else 3 times in a row. I'm probably not matching these tasks properly. And I can start to realize, A, is there a pattern to who these tasks are going to and getting completed by? And then B, how do I have a conversation with that student to make sure that I'm giving them things they want to work on? And that sort of goes back to buy-in. If you're giving students things they don't care about, they're not going to do them. And so trying to figure out what the students are passionate about so you can help inform what they are working on.
You mentioned big tasks and, you know, like how you categorize that, but do you ever go through the process of like breaking those down into tasks, smaller tasks, so they can get done in a reasonable like fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. This is not like the end of the planning process. This is just a high level, like roughly how are we thinking about these different things. Breaking these tasks then down into smaller bite-sized pieces is its own process and is a really important part of that overall thing. An idea that we talk about a lot in like my job, which has a really exciting acronym of MEC, which is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So we take a big thing like planning an off-season event, and we're gonna break that entire thing down into, okay, I know there's gonna be volunteers, I know there's gonna be referees, I know there's gonna be a field, I know there's gonna be site logistics. Breaking those all down into, okay, I know the referees need a head ref and everybody else. I know the site logistics, there's gonna be some amount of like janitors and getting the field there and things like that, and just breaking down and down and down until you end up with the core components where there isn't really a way to subdivide them any further. The mutually exclusive is that any one task at the bottom of that tree couldn't feasibly be in any other part of that tree. Like you couldn't follow that down and be like, oh, well, volunteer coordination's over here, but also over here. Like having that full taxonomy. And collectively exhaustive is when we get to the bottom of that tree, every single thing is accounted for across the board. So that is a separate like tree diagram breaking down of the different tasks. And absolutely, you would not be like, all right, we've got a big project, go.
Excuse me. How scalable is this model? Because I can see how it would definitely work with teams who have like 20 or so students. How do you see it working with like when you have like 5 students showing up to a meeting, especially with that buy-in piece? Sometimes it may not, none of the students want that buy-in, but still have to get it done.
Yeah, and that is a place that is definitely challenging. I definitely wrestle with that working with my small group on 125. Part of that's gonna be a mentor philosophy thing. One of the things that I think about with my own mentor philosophy is that there is going to be a sort of minimum level that the team is going to achieve. There's going to be some baseline. And reaching that baseline is going to be a ratio of student involvement and mentor involvement. Getting that mentor involvement piece as big, or sorry, student involvement piece as big as possible is always going to be the goal, but it's going to be a trade-off. There's going to be some years where I'll use my non-technical sub-team on 75-25 back in Nashville as an example, That is our Marketing, Outreach, and Operations subteam, or MOO as we call it. Our MOO team, usually like 3 to 6 kids, usually our least dedicated sub-team. Sometimes that means that we are pulling in other people to take on the grants. Sometimes we use the do as I say level of this structure of like, we're just gonna do this. And sometimes it means that we are either going to be dropping things that are deemed as like low importance, low urgency. And sometimes it's gonna be things that are gonna be picked up by a mentor. It's a task where, yes, I would love a student to do this, but it's not necessarily going to be the most impactful for the student. Filling in the first 5 grants is a great learning opportunity for the students. Filling in the 90th grant is not gonna you get very diminishing returns on how much learning and impact you can sort of squeeze out of a repetitive process like that. So figuring out which tasks are worth doing versus worth doing but by mentors versus worth doing not right now, and sort of filtering things through those lenses.
When you were talking about the website with the different like cards on it, how do you go from that to then having like an in-person discussion? And like when do you start having the discussions at meetings?
Yeah, so we actually start the discussion process at this like in the same session as we build this out. We have tried before where it's more asynchronous than that, and it just hasn't worked for us in the past, where you start like asking kids to put in cards when they have time and then hope to like have a conversation with them later. It just never really gets scheduled. So what we do is we say, we're gonna block several hours. We're gonna give everybody 15 or 20 minutes where your entire job is just to put as many ideas on here as possible. They're not getting any view of this, like they're just on their laptops typing in ideas for things that fit in these categories. Then we show them all, then they vote on them, and then once we have the list of like, okay, most important, least important by student sentiment, then we're gonna start talking through them and sort of hear from the room. Like this process is anonymous, but we start to hear from the room of like, I'll pose to the group, does anybody wanna talk through why this thing didn't work well? And then once somebody voices that with the person who wrote it originally or someone who just agrees with it, you start that conversation going. You do that left to right across this board, and then at the end of that several hour process of getting all of this, drawing all of this information out of the students, then you're left with a list and sort of the overall context of that list, and then that gets fed into the next phase of planning. Let's see, question in the back, and I think we've got like 5-10 minutes left, but yeah.
I heard all of this is going to be on a website. What's that website called?
I'll put a link to that somewhere. This is, I believe it's Bryce FRC Resource Hub. You can find me basically everywhere that first is. There's my email if you want to get in touch with me. I'm all over Chief Delphi. That Resource Hub is linked in my profile on Chief Delphi. If you're on the FRC Discord, I'm there too. Don't find me in the subreddit, I'm not there. But most places that first people are congregating online, you'll be able to find me. I am very accessible and very happy to talk about all of this sort of stuff. If you want to read through all the way back, any of those things I've put together, they're all there as well. The leadership training is currently 2, on its way to becoming 3 full modules that are hour-long presentations with hour-long accompanying syllabi that are developed to be interactive with activities for your leadership students. A goal of a lot of the things that I do is I make the resource so that other people can take the resource and learn from that resource. So all of that is out there. And I'm happy to have conversations about it and also have you take it to your teams as well. All right, well, no other questions. We can end a little bit early, and I'm happy to be up here to answer questions as well. Thank you.